Hello and welcome to the Bard Room. We have a wonderful guest today who has done so much classical theater. She's going to do her bio. I hope she doesn't take 2 hours, which she could fill. Uh, and we got Rachel Botchan in Brooklyn today.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you, Robin.
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. Um, she is a companion and colleague of Carol Leahy, who we discussed stuff about her doll's house a couple weeks ago. So people know people know people know people,
Yeah.
and that's what we really are surviving on, especially during this pandemic and the post pandemic and all of that stuff. So Rachel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Um,
I
what
just want to say I listened to Carol Healy's interview. It was wonderful. Yeah,
it was,
she's an amazing person, and you did
yeah.
a good job interviewing her.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah,
So thank
and she was great. Of course, I knew her through her friend Kit Westerman,
Right.
and because Kit was on a show we did called Keep the Ghost Light On about actors and actresses in the professional world during the pandemic and how they were surviving, and they were all happy people for some reason, and we all came to the conclusion that it's because it's always been hell in the theater.
Right.
So
Right.
this is just one more thing to contend with, and we've made of iron anyways, that type
Exactly.
of thing.
Survivors were survivors.
Survivors,
Yeah.
absolutely. So that was great for us. Anyway, so why don't you give us a bio, how you got into the theater, all the way up to and the highlights, and all the way up to the pandemic and how you dealt with that.
All right. Well, let's go back to the very beginning. I grew up in Berkeley, California, or thereabouts, Kensington, Bay Area. Um, Actually born in Long Island, and then we moved out there when I was 7. And I come from an arts background. My mother is a dancer, a choreographer, and teacher. My grandmother was a classically trained pianist, wonderful pianist. I had a grandfather who I never met who was an actor. So anyway, I just sort of fell into it. Seemed like always natural for me to have to go into a career in the arts. I was always surrounded by music and dance growing up. When I was really little, I wanted to be a dancer, but that morphed into acting.
Right.
And I would go into San Francisco to study at ACT, American Conservatory Theater, take classes there as well as be in some of the shows in the Young Conservatory when I was in high school. And a man there named Craig Slate, who was running the program, wonderful teacher and director, suggested that I audition for NYU Tisch.
Hmm.
That's where I ended up. So that's how I came back to New York. So I studied for 4 years undergrad at Tisch. I was in the Circle in the Square. Uh, 'Cause they have studios that they farm you
Hmm.
out to. And
Right.
then the classical theater, classical studio, which was run by a marvelous, my mentor and teacher, Louis Sheeter. And it was there that I really became interested in the classics. Um, and Shakespeare in particular. So then
Mhm.
from there, I auditioned for the Pearl Theater Company. They were having an internship back then for actors, and there were four of us who became interns there. But we also were able to act in the whole season, which was
Hmm.
a dream for me. The Pearl Theater, if for anyone who doesn't know, was uh, a theater company off Broadway, rooted in the classics, with a resident acting company.
Hmm.
So for me, this was heaven. You know, fame and fortune was not
Right.
anything that I was so interested in. I really
Right.
wanted to be amongst other like-minded artists. And so this company was, I just thought, oh my God, this is for me. So I stayed. Long story short, I ended up becoming a company member for 20 years. I also did regional theater and other off Broadway theater, some Yiddish
Hmm.
theater. Um, I met Carol Healy doing regional theater, wonderful people and directors that way. But my home was always the Pearl. I feel so fortunate to have had that. Then, unfortunately, in 2017, the Pearl closed. You know, financial
Right.
reasons. And but I had made many connections and many friends, so I continue doing theater. And some of us from the Pearl have formed a new company called the Resident Acting Company, which we were always called within the actors within the Pearl. We were the
Right.
RAC for short. And so a wonderful actor and director, Brad Cover, is now running that. I should say that it was Shepard Sobel who founded the Pearl Theater Company,
Mhm.
and he really had um, a vision to have this resident acting company doing the classics in New York City, which is no small feat, and it did have 33 seasons, so nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And yes, so that brings us to now. Then COVID hit, and I managed to stay pretty active. I do audiobooks, so
Right.
I was actually in the midst of recording a book sometime in March, and I remember saying, should we postpone this? Maybe I shouldn't come into the studio. And they were like, well,
Right.
let's see. And then, of course, it didn't happen. So,
Right.
but I had to scramble to form a home studio, which a lot of narrators I know did. And with the help of some wonderful uh, engineers, I was able to make a makeshift studio in my closet where I could still record
Mhm.
books during the pandemic, which has been a lifesaver.
Right.
I also teach at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, so I was teaching online um, Shakespeare, and then in the spring got to go in person, masked and
Hmm.
small classes, but that was exciting. Um, and a bunch of Zoom projects like you're doing, um, some Zoom plays, some Zoom events, readings, that kind of thing, to
Sure.
stay active. And I found that with Zoom, you can really get some exciting work happening.
Yeah.
There's something about those boxes, this urgency to communicate with one another, and also this in
Yeah.
a kind of, it's not theater, it's not film. What is it? But you can be kind of more subtle in your choices. I don't know. I found it kind of,
Yeah, it is interesting in that way. Yeah.
yeah.
Did you just a quickly, did you have companions, colleagues in the theater that were, for lack of a better terminology, put down by COVID, meaning they couldn't work, they were upset, they put a halt, they put their heels down and said, I'm not doing this anymore. I can't do Zoom. I can't do that stuff.
I mean, definitely the Zoom fatigue is a real thing.
Mhm.
Most of the actors I know will, though, jump at the chance to do any creative
Right.
project. I don't
Right.
think oh no, I do have a dear, dear friend who decided that Zoom was not for her. An actress,
Okay.
a wonderful actress from the Pearl, actually, and
Mhm.
she's kind of stepped back for now. She'll be back,
She'll
but
so she'll be back. Right. Okay.
yeah, but yeah, I knew people that lost work.
Yeah.
Tons of people who had seasons lined up
Sure.
that, and I didn't have, well, no, I had one workshop and one reading that got canceled.
Okay.
But as I said, I was fortunate to have some other kinds of work other than theater. But
Right.
I definitely know people who it's
Yeah.
been very difficult for. But as you
Yeah.
said, as we talked about before, we're
Yeah.
we're survivors, and
Yep. Yep.
most of the people that I know have a pretty good outlook about it, about the future as well
Yep.
for theater and
Yeah.
coming out of this now, I
I,
think.
I and I had a private student that just started actor studio, and
Yeah.
they went out and did everything Zoom. Um, and
Mm.
I felt bad for him. I really did. He's going back, which is great in September.
Mhm.
But he survived it. He liked it. He still enjoyed it.
You
But
like doing it? Yeah.
well, he has a great attitude anyways. He's I'm still in the actor studio. Aren't I still in the actor studio? It's like, yep, you
Right,
are.
right, right. Yeah.
Yep. And so things will be looking up in the future. So
Yeah.
let's go into your work. And again, you've done so many different classical productions from so many different playwrights. But let's go into your work with Ibsen and describe the productions, I think namely two, that you're in which you were involved, um, and basically anything idiosyncratic about those productions, as far as maybe you had a different script, or the director had a vision that was amazing, that you've never seen before, or anything that idiosyncratic about that.
Well, first let me say that my introduction to Ibsen, of course, was through A Doll's House, watching it both on
Hmm.
stage and film. And I think I was quite young when I first saw that a production, and I just immediately fell in love. So there's that. So I
Hmm.
already come to it with a deep love, as so many people do, I think, a connection. And in at NYU, I remember working on a scene. This was before the classical studio when I was at Circle in the Square, a scene from Rosmer's Home, when an Ibsen play, and with a wonderful teacher, um, Laurie Peters. And yeah, there was just something about it that was revelatory. So I had that experience, and in school, you're fortunate enough to work on one scene for many months, and it's
Yeah,
like a
right,
really
right.
rich experience.
Yeah.
Um, so then the play that I did at the Pearl was called When We Dead Awaken by Ibsen. That's his last play.
Hmm.
It's a very strange play, as many of his later works are, in terms of, when I say strange, I mean it has a lot of magical realism in it. It's very dreamlike, uh, very dark, but also with a lot of hope. The character I played was a young woman, Maya, who's in a terrible marriage, or I shouldn't say terrible, maybe just not fulfilling
Hmm.
marriage to an older sculptor, and she frees herself from that, which is, I think, a trope throughout Ibsen, of the woman awakening and finding her inner strength. So this is what I've always found to be true in Ibsen, more so than many playwrights. Many playwrights write for strong women, write strong women characters, but Ibsen is able to, and it's interesting because he's a man, but go into this very deep place of that moment when a woman finds agency and that inner power. So to me, that's what's so exciting about playing these roles. That play though had a really interesting design element. It was the last stage direction of the play is, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, is something like, and they die in a swirl, or they get there's an avalanche essentially.
Right, right.
It's like, how do you stage that, right? There's an avalanche and they get buried in snow. It's sort of like
Right.
up there with Exeunt pursued by a bear or something,
Oh yeah, right, right, right. Yeah.
you know. Um, so what they did, I remember the set designer was a woman named Sarah Lambert. She's a wonderful stage designer and set designer. It was sheets, so very simple,
Hmm.
and white sheets,
Hmm.
and for the, like, it takes place in the mountains and the fjords and the brooks, and I remember there was like a beautiful sheet that sort of draped down over some platforms, and I like put my feet in the brook of the sheets, the running water, and then for the avalanche it was just a swirl of sheets coming down from the sky. It was really imaginative. And also, when you're working on a shoestring. Though, I mean,
Right,
they
right.
had a nice budget, but
Yeah,
they were never one to spend a fortune on
for
sets.
sure.
So,
Yeah, yeah.
um, yeah, and there were some wonderful actors in that. A man named Robert Hawke, who's passed away now. Joanne Camp is an incredible actress, and also the wife of Shep Sobel. The director was a man named Benno Hanel, who was a really interesting guy. I don't know his whereabouts now, but I
Hmm.
just oh, Scott Whitehurst was in that. Dominic Cusker. Don't want to forget anyone.
Yeah.
Catherine Ganzel, yeah, my friend Catherine.
Okay.
So, but idiosyncratic, I don't know. Aside from that set, I just feel that the play itself is so rich and deep, and I had a really great experience with it. It was difficult. It wasn't a play that came easily or that maybe even audiences loved particularly. I
You're
don't
right,
know.
right,
Can't speak for anyone. It's not everyone's cup of tea.
right.
But I think it was also at a time in my life where I needed that to take control of my life and to have that, what I was explaining about that moment of, oh, I don't need a man. I can be my own person.
Right.
Although
Yeah.
my character does go off with this guy, this bear hunter, but
Yeah.
it's not clear whether they're going to really make it in the end. So I think she's found her own inner strength.
Yeah. It's interesting. I researched a bit of that. Done 10 years after Doll's House, 1889. And I know it was one of his last ones. It's interesting about what you talk about because he's writing this saying avalanche does fall,
Yeah, right.
and what did they do in 1889?
I know. I actually really wonder about that. Maybe, I
Yeah,
mean, do something with lighting, maybe, or
if they had it, yeah.
oh, right, they would, right.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, you don't really know. I mean, maybe with candles or
Hmm.
with gaslight or something like that.
Sound effects.
Yeah, right, right. Off stage, kind of reminds me of Shakespeare's Pericles, where they're going everywhere, and
Right, right.
how are they going to put that in Winter's Tale? How are they going to set this up? They just do it.
Mhm.
And he doesn't have a lot, especially in the 1600. So, okay, and then Hedda Gabler you did on Zoom, right?
Oh yeah, so just very recently, in 2020, Bedlam is an amazing theater company that everyone should look into. They do the classics and also other contemporary plays, but stripped down. So I feel like they try to really get at the heart of a classic play in a way that maybe makes you look at it. I mean, of course, this is the goal for any time one does a classic play, right? That you look at it in a new way, in a way that maybe you didn't see before, in a kind of modern way. And I think Ibsen really lends itself to a modern sensibility.
Hmm.
Um, so yes, so we did it on Zoom. I played Taya, which I found to be a fascinating
Yeah,
character. She's seemingly she's very vulnerable
yeah,
and seemingly they demean her a lot.
yep, right.
The other characters do, but I wanted to give her this fierce intelligence.
Hmm.
And I think she does the writings with Loveborg,
Sure,
and it's very
sure.
instrumental in that. So I thought, oh, that's a real in. She has an intellectual hunger, and maybe because of her place in society, she hasn't been able to, achieve her full potential. But what is that in her that has that thirst and hunger for knowledge? Uh,
Sure. Yeah.
and then that with the vulnerability felt like a really complex,
Yeah.
interesting character.
I remember directing the girl playing Taya when I did Hedda Gabler. And
Hmm.
I did a little exercise with her where every time I clapped, she heard something in the distance.
Ah,
You know what I'm saying? And
that's
so,
great. Yeah.
yeah. And so, there's something going on. What do I have to look at? Sort of an ADD type of
Mm.
sentimentality
And
to her. And yet she is incredibly scholarly.
mhm.
And I think had a jealousy of that. Um,
Yes. Right.
yeah,
When other characters, I'm always very mindful of when other characters say something about your character, you have to listen, but then you have to think, well, but why are they saying that?
absolutely.
It
Absolutely.
isn't
Yeah.
necessarily true that
Yeah.
she's dumb or that she's flighty. It's like, why, what? And as you said, maybe there's
Yeah.
a jealousy there. Why does she
Yeah.
need her to be? Yeah.
And Ibsen's such a great writer about challenges. One character challenges the other, maybe very subtly, but with each line,
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, she's a great character, and because it's also setting off Hedda as well.
Mm-hmm.
Hedda needs a girl. Hedda needs a playmate girlfriend.
Absolutely.
It's just like they circle around each other, and they really. And I think that has to do with Nora and Christine in A Doll's House. It's the same
Yeah.
type of scene that they're feeling each other out. And so we're really researching that. So I wanted to get to let me backtrack to Tisch School, and was a circle in the square that was
It
after that?
was, and it was a Meisner class. Yeah.
All right, that's the question I'm going to ask, as you probably know. So, were you method trained at NYU and then did the Meisner class? Is that how it worked?
I mean, so Circle in the Square it does have its roots in method for sure. Stanislavski.
Yeah.
But the thing that's interesting about Circle, and I think it's still this way because they still have a professional program, it's eclectic. So you get some Strasberg, you get some Meisner, you get
Mhm.
different these different, but they're all rooted, of course, in
Right.
Stanislavski. So
Right.
yes, I would say I had a method training and
Yeah.
background for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then
Um,
when you did the Meisner, did you have to just completely switch gears, or was it simple for you?
No, so Meisner, for anyone who has not studied it, it has a lot of this. You start with repetition.
Right. Right.
I would say to you, I like your glasses, and you say, I like your
Like your
glasses.
glasses, right? Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And and then you get in. I mean, it's been a long time since I've
Yeah.
done it.
Yeah.
But then you get into activities. So maybe it's just filling up this
Sure.
basket. While you learn the script, you learn the lines by rote so that you're fully off book
Mhm.
immediately. You come in with your scene partner off book, and you each have these different activities that you're doing as you do the scene. This is how I remember working on Rosmersholm, actually. I remember moving chairs from one side of the stage to the
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
while doing the scene. And no, so I think it did. I really responded to the Meisner technique. I didn't feel that it was in any way in opposition to any of the other method training I
Okay.
had had. Because, it's all about what are your actions,
Yeah.
what your motivations, your emotional prep, because then you go and you do your emotional prep before you start the activity and the scene.
Yep.
And then eventually the scene evolves and emerges
Yep.
into what it is somehow.
Right.
Yeah.
Because there's always a problem and you have to attack it and try to solve it. You may never do that through rehearsal. You may do it during their show time.
Mhm.
And then it's the attacks. I think that's what you're talking about. Was this going to be a method attack? Is this going to be a Meisner attack, or a combination of both, or anything else? Physical action, all that you were talking about. So what I'd like to ask you is, um, did you approach an Ibsen type of acting, or was it just how you do every single show? Is it the same approach? Does it have to do with the dialogue?
Mhm.
And then along with that, because I've been talking to a lot of people, and we've been discussing this in our rehearsals. Um, a lot of Carol and I discussed this too. Um, a lot of the plays that are out there for especially a doll's house, because we're doing the Gutenberg project one. It sounds stilted, and she was saying it sounds British.
Mhm.
It's very British in nature, and I kind of make it. Yeah, it's British, but I think it's more Victorian. The way that it is written, and then it's translated obviously from Norwegian.
Mhm.
So with all of those in mind, did you approach it? How did you approach your characters in that way?
I think I always, and this is just me personally, try
Yeah.
to approach a role through truth and um, uh, not thinking of a style right offhand. I try to approach it from a natural way. And I don't mean naturalistic, like mumble, 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 because
Right.
I
Right.
because
Right.
I
Right.
really believe in language, um, and using language. And also, then, it depends on the production. Like When We Dead Awaken was a bit more in the time period. So yes, your deportment may be different. I was wearing a corset that affects how you move.
Mm-hmm.
Women wouldn't, if you could see me, I'm sitting like completely cross-legged with like my legs flailing about. You wouldn't sit that way, So I do think that there's a way to approach it on the playwright's terms or the director's terms that does incorporate style, but in terms of the actual truth of the acting and the language, I try to have that be not, certainly not think British or Victorian, but come at it from what is what is really there, because I feel like humanity, and that's what makes these plays classics, is it's always the same. There's always the heart of it is always the
Yeah.
human condition.
Right. Right. Like the
Um,
science experiment where you have the control and the variable. So the control is the human condition and the variables are all the styles that you're dealing with in every play.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's right. And then with the Bedlam, I mean, it was Zoom, so obviously we didn't have it staged or have a whole lot of movement, but uh, Zach Elkind was the director, marvelous young director. He really wanted it to have a very modern quality, especially in the language, and it was a an adaptation that he put together actually. So
Hmm.
it had the language still felt much more modern than maybe some translations might, but still true to the time period for
Sure.
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 Yeah.
And let me jump off of that as well and piggyback another question.
Hmm.
As far as dialect,
Hmm.
would you say you probably work with a lot of New York actors. So
Hmm.
would you say it's okay for them to come in and talk like this and keep the accent, or should they tailor it? And someone from the South or somebody from the Midwest, should they tailor it
Hmm.
to what the characters would be sounding like?
So that's a really interesting question because we have this in Shakespeare as well when I
Yeah,
teach Shakespeare. And
yeah,
often with my students, I say use your own dialect, but try to, and it's kind of a hard
yeah.
thing to say, like try to sort of soften it perhaps. But what does that even mean?
Yeah, like
Because
a soft R or something like that. Yeah.
everybody speaks differently and it's right. There's no right way to talk, right? And I
Right.
think we're really feeling this more and more in our society that we don't want to be that sort of, it's a little classist to say like, oh no, you have to speak a certain kind of way, right?
Hmm.
Um, However, that said, I think it can be distracting if you have too many really strong dialects. So, my training was in very much at the Pearl. We worked with a man named Robert Neff Williams, who also taught at Juilliard in Columbia, and I also learned this at NYU, which is Standard American
Yeah. Yeah.
speech. Now, I don't know if they call it that anymore, if
Yeah.
they've
I use that. Yep. I
yeah.
teach that. Yep.
Yeah, so I, I'm a fan of that, but I also can, I don't know about Ibsen, but I can see, I don't feel like you have to completely change your dialect for it to work,
Right.
if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it does. And it's a question all my, 20 to 30 years in this business have been grappling with, because sometimes I get annoyed, especially with films,
Mhm.
of what they're doing with it. For example, Last Temptation of Christ is one
Mhm.
of my favorites, and Harvey Keitel doesn't change his accent for that.
Right,
And
and it can be annoying.
and he says, "Listen, Jesus, this is what we're talking about," and that type of thing. And so, of course, Scorsese loves it when he's directing it because he's a New York,
Mhm.
type of director. And he says, "Harvey, just do it the way you would say it," and it's distracting. I think that's what you're talking about. If
Yeah.
and then you have to see that line of how distracting it could be. Um,
Yeah, and then of course, and it also depends on the material because
right.
if you're doing an Irish play like Playboy of the Western World or something,
Yeah. Yeah.
everybody needs to have the same dialect. You want to have a
Absolutely.
dialect coach come in
Yeah.
and do that Northern
Yeah.
Irish, whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
but, and then
That's why that yeah, and that's why I'm asking you about that, because Ibsen, Chekhov, Strindberg, and even, well, GB Shaw is British,
yeah,
but those people are being translated
right.
from their original. So how do you attack that? I think you're right. There's more free.
I think
Um,
it can be a little bit more so, but um, Yeah, because they would be speaking in Norwegian. We're not speaking in Norwegian, so
Right,
speaking in
right.
English. So yeah, yeah.
Were you ever in a show, and you don't have to say which one it was or anything like that,
Mhm.
where the director said, "Okay, we're all over the place with our dialects. Let's sit down and do our standard American or whatever he wanted."
Yeah, I mean, I would say that most of the plays at the Pearl were like that.
Yeah. So,
It came from that tradition, which maybe is a little um, old-fashioned now. I don't know, but I'm glad I had the experience of it. You know.
I know, and I think the philosophy, and you probably came to this too, is um, if you're not bothered by it as a director or even as an audience member, it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
If it is sticking out like a sore thumb, um, then you're concentrating on it. Just like when Robert Edmund Jones, his philosophy when he did theater was everything should be equal. You shouldn't be just staring at the set. Oh, what a
Mhm.
beautiful set. You shouldn't be
Right.
just staring at the costumes. What a beautiful costume. Everything should be in a line. And this guy is 120 years old now, and I still believe in that, you know,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
type of thing. It's not, you're not getting hit over the head by a set, oh, that's the theme. That's the symbolism that he's going for, that type of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's funny because sometimes if you have, I think dialects work best when they do feel natural and you're not going, oh, that's a really great Scottish dialect.
absolutely,
You know?
absolutely,
So,
absolutely. Yeah, it's funny.
yeah.
The first thing that comes up is Henry V, where they have a Welshman and an Irishman, so they should
Right.
be speaking that way, and they're
Mhm.
still from Great Britain, so it will still work that way.
Yeah.
So that's great stuff. This is so wonderful. I am still, we are still working on our dialect for
Hmm.
Doll's House.
And what
Um,
are you going with the standard
we're doing
American?
the standard American. They
Mhm.
did come with that. These actors did come with that, so they
That,
know what I'm
that makes
talking
it
about.
easy. Yeah.
But then there's times, and we get comical about this, but then there's times where I heard Biank instead of bank. I heard
Uh,
Dr. Briank, I heard, those things. And it's just a laziness. And I
I
think
agree. Yeah.
you just
I
tweak the laziness. And if you're really identifying where that is, they're like, okay, that's a no. I'll do that later. I'll do that again, and that's fine. So nobody really came with it. My doctor Ronk, we just discovered it was Ronk.
wrong.
Yeah, um, is is a very New York guy, and
Mhm.
he comes with that, but it works. It's not distracting.
Right.
It
Yeah.
is so, and it's real. You don't want to mess with it. You
Good.
really don't want to mess with it and say, it's the intermediate A ask, instead of esk or something like that. And it's not disturbing. It's not disturbing the whole flow of things. It's actually making it, as you said, naturalistic, or realism is
Right.
coming out.
Because in life, when we're in a group of people, even if we're all in New York City or we're all in
Yeah,
Connecticut, there's
yeah,
going to be different dialects. It's what happens,
yeah,
people were raised
absolutely.
different places and
Yeah,
probably in Norway, I don't know, maybe there are different dialects or
yeah, yeah,
maybe
yeah,
Dr. Ronk came from a different village than, the other. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, just one more thing, if we can get into a bit of a subject that we have been talking about in rehearsal, is the aspect of the phenomenon of melodrama.
Okay.
Ibsen was called, I don't think he's called this anymore, the godfather or the grandfather or the father of melodrama.
Uh-huh.
Because when I say that to people, first of all, the word has been bastardized.
Yeah, it's
Um,
like a negative
it's a
connotation.
negative connotation. It's
Yeah.
twist the mustache, tie the girl to the tracks,
Hmm.
type of mentality. Um,
Hmm.
and I don't think he was going for that.
Hmm.
Um, I also think about Dickens, with this type of storytelling that it's with scandal.
Yeah.
What are we going to sweep under the carpet? Who's going to be ousted? Who's going to be the outsider? Who's going to be the insider? All of that. And what they called Dickensian writing was melodramatic realism,
Ah, I love that. That's
which
great.
is a great pairing of words. I
I
really
think
think.
that's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I think of melodrama, I agree. It's been bashed and it has this awful, you feel like, ooh, I don't want to be a part of melodrama. That's
Yeah.
like
Right. Right. And
overacting
you're
or,
you're being melodramatic as an 8-year-old.
yeah, right. Right. It has this feeling that you're bad acting, right? But
Right.
I love it because I feel like it's just heightened circumstances.
Right,
And that's how
right,
I think of it. As
right,
like the stakes are so high in melodrama. So
right.
it's so fun. It's fun to
Yeah,
play. It's fun to watch people going through these
right.
really high stakes. And
And then
it
I
can
think
still be true. It doesn't have to be false, you know.
that's true because it's realism. It's still
Right,
realism. I mean, this could
right.
happen next door in a town in Norway. This could happen, in England or whatever. So, and then I think the word melodramatic or melodrama as a subject came more in the Edwardian period in the
Hmm.
1900s when they started doing film. So
Hmm.
they had to, do the
Right. Ooh,
yeah, the
yeah,
swooning and all of that,
yeah,
and the mustache twirling and all of that, so that you're reading the lines, but they're coming in, how those old films went.
I
Um,
do.
I think that's where the bastardization started,
Interesting.
and then Chekhov was fighting against that.
Uh-huh. Hmm.
He was like, no, it's realism, and that's fine. And then he brought him over to New York, and then Arthur Miller and Tennessee Williams was really fighting against that.
Hmm.
And we're getting no, it's realism, it's realism, it's realism.
Except it's so, but I mean, but I mean, I've done some Tennessee Williams, and
Yeah,
I mean, some of those
I
characters
know,
are way over the top in a good way. And
I
I
know.
don't know. I mean, yeah, I
I
know
think
that
he,
that's what it's
I think
labeled.
Tennessee Williams met some of those people, and I
Mhm.
think he created them because he wanted to hang out with them, you
Right.
know, that type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. I'm
I'm gonna be with these people for the next year, so I'm gonna write about
Mhm.
in that sort of imaginative way.
Mhm.
So this is great stuff, Rachel. I really appreciate it. I hope we stay in touch,
Yeah. Best
and
of luck with your with the dolls. I hope you get to see it.
thank you. Sorry, the bus is here, and
That's okay.
the dog is here.
I,
She knows when to end. So
yeah.
thank you very much, and keep safe.
You
And I
too.
will see you soon. I'm going to stop recording. And
Okay.
thank you everybody for entering the Bard Room with Rachel Botchan.